Well, I will start again because maybe no one hear me. Good afternoon again, and it is my great pleasure to welcome you to the conference Serbia and NATO Partnership for the Future, organized by Council for Strategic Policy under the auspices of the Embassy of the Republic of Bulgaria. We hope that today's conference will provide a wide opportunity for open and constructive discussion on many issues related to 15 years of Serbia and NATO partnership and further perspectives. Before we start the discussion on the panels, we will hear an introductory speech by NATO Assistant Secretary General for Public Diplomacy, Bajba Braže, and after her speech by Nemanja Starović, State Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Serbia.
Security in the Western Balkans. That's why it represents by far the longest-lasting political and operational investment of NATO. First, of course, the Western Balkans is a region where NATO has deployed KFOR in Kosovo since June 1999, and today it accounts for roughly 3,500 personnel, acting under the provisions of UN Security Council Resolution 1244. I would also like to point out that not only in KFOR, but also Alliance has been committed to building long-term peace and stability in Bosnia and Herzegovina, where we started supporting the international community's efforts to end the conflict, and there NATO played a key role in implementing the Dayton Peace Agreement through peacekeeping deployments over a 9-year period from December 1995 to December 2004. And today, when the primary responsibility for military aspects is given over to the European Union, we work very closely with the EU to implement it. Second, I would also like to say a few words about the sort of political choices and arrangements. Today, most of the countries in the region are NATO members. And of course, we also have EU members, and we have those that are NATO members but not EU members. But some, like Serbia, have made a different choice, and NATO fully respects such sovereign decision. However, NATO and Serbia have a mature, respectful relationship, and we work very well together. In just a few months, we will celebrate 15 years since Serbia joined the NATO-Partnership for Peace program. These 15 years have been marked by many achievements, and they have also demonstrated that partnership with NATO can bring real benefits to Serbia and its citizens, but also to the wider region. NATO, on our side, we are committed to building a strong partnership with Serbia. It's a respected, valued, important partner for the alliance, country with rich history and bright future. It's important for us at NATO, and NATO is important for Serbia. This partnership has proven to be a valuable tool to rebuild trust, mutual understanding, and also to find common grounds to establish and build on the dialogue. While acknowledging the role and importance of this partnership, I would like to emphasize that it's not a goal in itself. Rather, it is a means to an end, to achieve significant results that partnership yield in many different domains. From civil emergency and preparedness of training Serbian forces for peacekeeping operations, security service reform systems, to scientific cooperation, but also our civil society cooperation and support, but also exchanges, visits, universities, and political dialogue. Here also I would like to say a few words about our work and assistance during the pandemic. As you know, NATO has facilitated the airlift of critical supplies, the transport of medical personnel, patients, equipment, but also such things as construction of field hospitals, and also investing in science to develop a variety of different experiments and discoveries. We donated medical equipment both to allied and partner countries, including in the Western Balkans, and also to Serbia. For example, The Czech Republic worked closely with Serbia in the development of filters for masks, and it was done under a NATO framework for cooperation among defense education institutions. Turkey has donated equipment and others. Our alliance through KFOR also provided medical equipment to all communities in Kosovo. So this partnership really is the most important tool in setting a new positive long-term relationship between NATO and Serbia. And it is a facilitator of establishing a trusted political dialogue. This dialogue between NATO and Serbia is now well established up to the highest political levels. We saw that during the recent visits that President Vučić paid to NATO headquarters, meeting Secretary General Stoltenberg just a few weeks ago, they very clearly announced this common interest in the partnership between Serbia and NATO. And rarely in the past two decades could we have observed such a positive momentum in NATO-Serbian relationship. So the Secretary General and President Vučić did reaffirm the desire and commitment to strengthen mutual cooperation, and it's based on the following principles. First, NATO's commitment to security and stability in the Western Balkans through KFOR. SecGen confirmed that KFOR will remain and operate under the provisions of UN Security Council Resolution 1244, guaranteeing a safe and secure environment and freedom of movement for all communities in Kosovo. And it will happen as long as it may be necessary. That said, any long-lasting solution can only be political. NATO fully supports the EU-sponsored dialogue on normalization of relations between Belgrade and Pristina. The commitment to the dialogue was fully reaffirmed also by President Vučić. Again, it's not for me to be overly prescriptive of this, but I do believe that, and so does NATO, that regional cooperation is one of the keys to a long-lasting stabilization in the Western Balkans. Partnership with NATO brings real benefits to Serbia, citizens of Serbia, and the wider region. In this context, I would also like to say a few words about external actors and destabilizing actions such as disinformation and hostile information. Especially during the pandemic, we witnessed an increase in disinformation and propaganda activities, in many cases coming from Russia and other external actors. They were aiming to undermine our democracies and deepen divisions, not only within NATO and Euro-Atlantic region, but also in Western Balkans, in Serbia and other countries. And in this respect, facts and clear communications can save lives not only during the health crisis, but they play a role in everyday work of our societies to support the government efforts to ensure that our societies are resilient and able to counter external threats. We know that proactive communications engage audiences and provide factual information. It does help to build societal resilience. This is why we are working closely with civil society organizations across the region to support projects on the grounds that build resilience to disinformation. That benefits both allied and partner nations, including in Serbia. So I would like to underline that we have worked closely with a number of Serbian institutions to support these efforts, promote dialogue, and increase awareness about NATO, the fact that NATO is a defense alliance, and the fact that we are based on the same democratic values as Serbia is. I would like to thank the Council for Strategic Policy that has been the trusted partner of NATO and our today's host. I'm pleased to say that for the first time this year, NATO is co-sponsoring a project presented by this distinguished institution. And it aims to enhance awareness and understanding of the objectives and policies of the alliance, but also of our cooperation with Serbia, especially among younger generations. And that is just one example of the many grassroots projects that the Alliance supports, with the aim to build dialogue and understanding between us. So we are always looking to broaden our relationship with the civil society. And we would welcome new proposals from civil society organizations in Serbia. With this, ladies and gentlemen, dear participants, I would like to conclude and say that I am absolutely convinced that NATO and Serbia should and will continue to work together to make all Western Balkans and all Euro-Atlantic area a safe, peaceful, stable and prosperous part. In this endeavor, Serbia bears the honor and the burden to play an essential and unique role. And I thank you and wish you a successful conference.
Uvažene dame i gospodo, čast mi je i zadovoljstvo da zajedno s ambasadorkom Baibom Braže, pomoćnikom generalnog sekretara NATO za javnu diplomatiju, govorim na otvaranju današnje konferencije posvećene partnerskoj saradnji Republike Srbije i NATO saveza. Želim da se zahvalim ambasadoru Republike Bugarske, Petku Dojkovu, na pozivu, kao i Savetu za strateške politike i NATO vojnoj kancelariji za vezu u Beogradu kao suorganizatorima ovog događaja. Uveren sam da će današnja konferencija pružiti široku mogućnost za otvorenu i konstruktivnu raspravu o mnogim pitanjima od interesa za Srbiju, region i šire okruženje, kao i priliku da se dodatno osvetle suštine i dometi partnerske saradnje Srbije sa NATO, kao i potencijali za dalje unapređenje. Ministarstvo spoljnih poslova Republike Srbije, polazeći od premise da suština državne politike treba da bude dostupna javnosti, pruža doprinos tom cilju kroz učešće na skupovima poput ovog, uz spremnost da argumentovano i jasno obrazložimo ciljeve državne politike i ostvarene domete, te da odgovorimo na sva pitanja za koje postoji interes javnosti. Pored ovog mog obraćanja, ambasador Dijana Ivančić, vršilac dužnosti pomoćnika ministra za bezbednosnu politiku, će takođe uzeti učešće na jednom od panela ove konferencije, čime potvrđujemo naše opredeljenje da spoljna i bezbednosna politika, posebno kada su u pitanju odnosi Srbije i NATO saveza, budu transparentne i razumljive široj javnosti, kao i da nema bilo kakve skrivene agende koja bi stvarala sumnje ili nedoumice. Srbija se pozicionirala na međunarodnoj sceni kao odgovoran, predvidiv i kredibilan partner koji unapređuje mir i bezbednost u regionu, ali istovremeno i deli odgovornost na širem planu u promociji mira i suzbijanju bezbednosnih izazova. Svojim spoljno-političkim prioritetima, zaštiti suvereniteta i teritorijalnog integriteta, strateškim pravcem ka članstvu u Europskoj uniji, promocijom regionalne saradnje i negovanja prijateljskih i partnerskih odnosa na globalnom planu, Srbija se potvrdila kao izvoznik bezbednosti i činilac bitan za rešavanje mnogih pitanja, prvenstveno unutar našeg regiona. Naš cilj je da budemo okrenuti ka budućnosti, ali i spremni da pravedno rešavamo pitanja iz prošlosti, istovremeno štiteći na najbolji mogući način u datim realnostima ključne nacionalne interese. Razvijamo odnose sa svim faktorima svetske politike, čineći time sopstvenu bezbednost održivom, ali istovremeno doprinosimo očuvanju mira i bezbednosti u regionu kao svom neposrednom okruženju. Uvereni smo da je preduslov za sveukupni prosperitet regiona postojanje političke volje svih aktera da se izađe iz začaranog kruga života u prošlosti i da se sporna pitanja rešavaju orijentacijom ka budućnosti, ekonomskom razvoju i regionalnom povezivanju. Jedan od bitnih elemenata državne politike Republike Srbije i nastojanje da region bude trajno stabilan i razvijenje partnerskih odnosa sa NATO, koji su zasnovani na jasnim premisama. Partnerska saradnja na osnovama politike vojne neutralnosti, bez aspiracija za članstvom u alijansi, ali istovremeno je otvorenost da se dalje unapređuje politički dijalog i praktična saradnja sa NATO savezom u svim oblastima od zajedničkog interesa. Želim da izrazim zadovoljstvo što naši NATO partneri takvu poziciju Republike Srbije razumeju i poštuju. Unapređenju saradnje posebno doprinosi intenzivan dijalog na najvišem nivou između predsjednika Republike Srbije Aleksandra Vučića i generalnog sekretara NATO-a Jensa Stoltenberga, o čemu svedoči i njihov nedavni razgovor u središtu NATO saveza u Briselu. Nesporna je činjenica da su odnosi Srbije i NATO-a delikatni zbog nasleđa iz prošlosti. NATO bombardovanja tadašnje Savezne Republike Jugoslavije bez ovlašćenja Saveta bezbednosti Ujedinjenih nacija, što za nas predstavlja akt agresije na jednu suverenu zemlju u doba svetskog mira, uz ogromne žrtve i materijalna razaranja. Te događaje ne možemo i ne smemo zaboraviti. upućujući univerzalnu poruku da se nešto slično tome nikada ne sme ponoviti. Iako Srbija i NATO i posle 20 godina imaju različita gledišta na događaje iz 1999. godine, obe strane, a što su više puta i potvrdile, imaju odgovornost i obavezu da čine sve da se obezbedi trajna stabilnost u regionu, pri čemu svako nosi svoj deo odgovornosti u postizanju tog cilja, do koga se može stići jedino jačanjem saradnje i međusobnog poverenja. Posebno važan segment dijaloga Srbije sa NATO savezom, a od koga značajno zavisi percepcija o alijansi u javnom mjenju Srbije, jeste situacija na Kosovu i Metohiji. Srbija i NATO imaju obavezu, po rezoluciji Saveta bezbednosti Ujedinjenih nacija 1244, ali i po vojno-tehničkom sporazumu iz Kumanova. I puna primjena tih obaveza predstavlja imperativ, što je Srbija pokazala u svim sadašnjim prilikama. Srbija podržava i visoko ceni angažovanje međunarodnih bezbednostnih snaga KFOR u pokrajini u striktnom, potpunom i nepristrasnom sprovođenju mandata koji je utvrđen rezolucijom Saveta bezbednosti Ujedinjenih nacija 1244. Međunarodne snage KFOR ostaju jedina legalna vojna formacija u pokrajini. Ključni garant sprovođenja Briselskog sporazuma i praktično jedini garant bezbednosti i opstanku Srba, njihove imovine te verske i kulturne baštine na Kosovu i Metohiji. Svaki jednostrani pokušaj da se nekom drugom dodeli ili da neko drugi preuzme deo mandata i obaveza KFOR-a predstavlja kršenje rezolucije Saveta bezbednosti Ujedinjenih nacija 1244 i potencijalne izvor nestabilnosti i tenzije. Spremni smo da nastavimo dijalog sa Prištinom u dobroj veri, a suština pozicije Srbije i ono što uvek naglašava i predsjednik Srbije Aleksandar Vučić jeste neophodnost da se kroz ozbiljan pristup svih strana dođe do kompromisnog, trajnog i održivog rešenja kojim nijedna strana neće dobiti sve, odnosno kojom bi istovremeno svi dobili dovoljno. Na kraju želim da izrazim uverenje da saradnja NATO i Srbije ima svoju budućnost i potencijale kroz dalje razvijenje partnerstva koje može u svakoj pojedinačnoj oblasti da se dodatno proširuje i unapređuje u interesu postizanja zajedničkih ciljeva, pre svega bezbednosti i stabilnosti. Takođe, dozvolite mi da podsjetim da se krajem ove godine navršava 15 godina od kada je Srbija postala članica NATO programa Partnerstvo za mir, što je jubilej koji će kažem na prikladan. Svima želim da se radi po novostoj diskusiji.
After those inspirative remarks, we will start our first panel. This year sees the 15th anniversary of Serbia's accession to Partnership for Peace, and this could be the time to review how far we have come and in that cooperation and what are the perspectives and potential for further improvement. We have excellent panelists here, and they are Ambassador Dijana Ivančević, Acting Assistant Foreign Minister for Security Policy, General Tommaso Vitale, Chief of NATO Military Liaison Office in Belgrade, and Ambassador Asja Davidova, Director of the Security Policy Directorate, Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the Republic of Bulgaria. And my first question is for all of you, and it is how do you assess the current relation between Serbia and the alliance, and in which areas could that cooperation potentially be improved? Ambassador Ivančić.
Thank you, Mrs. Richta. It is my pleasure today to participate today on the panel regarding the partnership cooperation between the Republic of Serbia and NATO, together with Ambassador Davidova and General Vitale. I would like to thank the Embassy of the Republic of Bulgaria, the Council for Strategic Policy, and NATO Military Liaison Office for organization of this conference. Concerning the relations between Serbia and NATO, we heard a lot from Assistant Secretary General Mrs. Braže and the State Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Starović. Let me say just few words. Our policy of military neutrality means that we don't have aspiration to become NATO member, but We don't have any aspiration to any other military alliance. We want to be responsible, reliable and predictable partner to NATO. At the same time, Serbia is building good relations with other international relevant players based on our own national interests. Let me say that the policy of military neutrality doesn't mean self-isolation. It means it includes our readiness to share and to cooperate and share responsibilities with our partners. I would like as well to express my satisfaction that our NATO partners understood very well Serbian position. That proves the speech of Assistant Secretary General Mrs. Braja. She mentioned the political dialogue. Serbia have a very developed political dialogue in highest level. We have very frequent visits from both sides, and we have a practical cooperation in many fields. Mrs. Braja mentioned the recent visit of the President Vučić to NATO HQ in Brussels, and we hope that we will have the honor to host Mr. Stoltenberg this year in Serbia at the end of this year. Since Serbia joined PFP program 15 years ago, we opened our mission to NATO in Brussels, and we start the cooperation with NATO. There was numerous benefits from that cooperation. We have many benefits in military field cooperation and non-military cooperation. Our armed forces are improving their operational and functional capacities and implementing modern military standards that is very important for our participation in EU and UN peacekeeping missions. By taking part in the activities like conferences, seminars, trainings, our MOD and Serbian armed forces gain new knowledge and skills, and it is of course very important. And in addition of this building military capacity, we have a very, very good cooperation in non-military field like PFP program of Science for Peace and Security, SPS. Serbia is one of the leading partner in program Building Integrity, its aim is fight against corruption in defense and security sector. We are paying a great attention to the gender equality. I mean, the resolution of UN Security Council 1325, Women, Peace and Security, and the fact that in our missions we have 9.3% of women participating in those peacekeeping missions, and I'm very, very proud of that fact, because the average in UN is 3%. So there is a lot of opportunity for further cooperation.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. General Vitale, how do you see a position of Serbia in a partnership for peace and the relation between Serbia and Alliance?
Thank you very much. First, I would like to join Ambassador Ivacic in thanking Bulgarian Embassy and Council for Strategic Policy for having organized this event. I think that every time we have the opportunity, the occasion to talk about NATO-Serbia relation, is for us a very important moment. It's a very great opportunity because we can better present to the public opinion what we are doing together and the excellent level of cooperation we have reached so far. So this is really the core business of this kind of event, and so I'm very pleased of this opportunity. And I was also delighted to listen to Ambassador Ivancic. So to sum up her message, I would say the NATO-Serbia partnership is a story of success. It was born in 2006 when Serbia joined both the Partnership for Peace and Euro-Atlantic Partnership Council. And by the way, also in 2006, the office I had the privilege to lead was established in Belgrade. And since then, a lot of work has been done together. In principle, we should facilitate Serbia in its effort to better address today's security challenges. And this based, of course, on Serbia request, because it's very important to underline that all NATO partnership is demand-driven. And why is a story of success? For what Ambassador said, and let me add a few words. Serbia is indeed a valuable, respected and reliable partner, and Serbia is playing a key role in keeping security and stability in the whole region. And allies and the alliance as a whole really highly values this cooperation, which we consider robust, very well organized, and as it was said, mutually beneficial. This is a very important concept. We do something, but we receive something back. And during this year, many things has been done. Let me simply highlight very, very briefly some of that. We work together to better face disaster and to manage the effect of the disaster. We train Serbian soldiers for multinational operation and mission. We facilitate Serbia in its effort to move along in path of defense and security reform, and not only. We spend millions of euros in assisting Serbia in destroy obsolete ammunition, and also the recent event show us how it's important for environmental issue, and not only to move forward in this regard. And with a special trust fund, we are talking a sort of funding mechanism that the alliance makes available for all the partners. Moreover, the ambassador was mentioning the Science for Peace and Security program. This is one of the most important tools because it can really show how beneficial could be working together on different issues. And Serbia, participated in more than 30 activities dealing with different issues addressing security challenge, such as defense against chemical, biological, and nuclear and radiological issue, cyber defense, human security, and this clearly shows us that in these 15 years we work a lot. And maybe what we have done, what we are doing, what we will do should be better presented to the public opinion and in a more factual and a more complete way. We are going to celebrate this anniversary, and allow me to answer to the second part of the question. If there is a room for improvement, of course there is room. In every aspect of our life, we can improve ourselves. But let me simply underline that, as I said earlier, a partnership is demand-driven. It means that Serbia can choose pace, scope, intensity of the cooperation with NATO. It's up to Serbia to choose inside an ideal basket, when we put all the activities, which one is best for them according to their need. Of course, science for peace, disaster consequent management, and public diplomacy are for sure areas in which we can do, if both want to do, something more and more important.
Thank you, General. Ambassador Davidova, the same question is for you, and as a neighboring country and with your experience, how do you see that relations Serbia and NATO and some potential improvement in which areas it could be?
Thank you very much. First, in my turn, let me thank our ambassador, Mr. Petko Dojkov, and the whole Bulgarian embassy here for hosting this event. My thanks go also to the Council for Strategic Policy for organizing this important conference within the context of 15th anniversary of Serbia's membership in Partnership for Peace. And of course, we are very grateful to the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Serbia and military liaison officer here for supporting this event. Going back to your question, NATO-Serbia partnership, it has at its core the idea for peace and stability and security in the region of Western Balkans. And this idea is already bringing positive results. We see more positive political developments in the region. We see countries from the region aspiring for European integration, for Euro-Atlantic membership. We see economic developments. And this would create also a precondition, and we also see results in these areas that we see better economic connectivity, better political relationship in the region. These are always main features of some partnership that is giving positive results. With regard to partnership between Serbia and NATO, as it has been several times said by previous speakers, we fully respect the idea of Serbia's military neutrality. And that's why it is called individual partnership. Actually, this is a partnership that is tailor-made to the requirements and interests of each individual partner country. We are very glad to see that for this period of partnership between Serbia and NATO, a lot of activities have been carried out. I think Serbia have been engaged in more than 2,000 activities within NATO in different areas, as Ambassador Ivancic said. Practical cooperation goes hand in hand with enhancing the political dialogue, most recently exemplified by the visit of President Vučić to NATO headquarters and talks with NATO Secretary General. So the political dialogue on its side gives further strength to the foundation to further develop practical cooperation. Recently, within NATO, our work is ongoing to better streamline the existing partnership instruments. This goes also to Serbia, and we know that Serbia is engaged in talks with NATO in order to better streamline and better develop and frame the cooperation with NATO.
Thanks. General Vitale, many democratic societies are increasingly facing sophisticated hybrid attacks to which they are sometimes unable to respond using their own capabilities. How does the Alliance see this type of threats, let's say modern threats, and the improvement of joint efforts toward a suitable response?
Thank you very much for your question. Let me first very briefly say, when we are talking about hybrid threats, we are referring to a combination of military and non-military activity, which includes disinformation, propaganda, sabotage, economic pressure, and cyber attacks. And what is new in this recent year, what we notice, is the speed, the intensity, and the scale of these hybrid threats, mainly linked to the innovation, technology innovation, and to the global connectivity. And also the national vulnerability can produce some sort of effect that goes beyond the borders. This is why the response to this action should be the more comprehensive as possible. This doesn't imply a global cooperation in that respect. NATO towards the hybrid threats. We consider as one of the top priority to be prepared to face this kind of threat, to deter, to react, to prevent, essentially. As a part of collective defense, we are ready to support any ally in order to better respond to this kind of threats. Having in mind that the primary responsibility to respond to the hybrid threats belong to the targeted nation. Is a very important to react and to be prepared. And NATO has a strategy for that. It's a strategy fundamentally aimed to be prepared, to deter, and to defend. Our three phases. In the first, what we daily do, we collect, share, assess as many information we can to create the best operational picture. We are continuously, as for the second phase, trying to increase the readiness and the preparedness of our military forces, and also enhancing the decision-making process and the command structure. This is done to send a sort of clear message to a potential aggressor. The NATO is improving its responsiveness in both military and political side of the alliance. And if the deterrence failed, so NATO is acted to prompt react wherever and whenever possible. What is the implication of the global cooperation regarding also the partner? We can start from the assumption that no one can tackle the hybrid threats alone. This is why the alliance is engaging heavily partners and also European Union in order to counter the hybrid threats, to enhance resilience with, I would say, a special focus on cyber attacks. And the second consideration is, in order to ensure that all our countries, population, people can better resist to this kind of threat, we have to work all together. Military, civilian personnel, public and private sector, institution, government. Only together we can have the best and comprehensive approach. We have an important division inside NATO, the NATO Joint Information, Intelligence and Security Division, with a branch expressively addressed to the hybrid threats, dealing continuously in countering propaganda, but not with more propaganda, but simply with fact, because we firmly believe that we have to respond to the lies being factual. And so we are ready to cooperate with allies for sure as a part of collective defense, with partners, but also with the consideration that we can learn also from the partner. There are some examples, as Finland, Sweden, which highly technological system on comprehensive security. So the reason we build sort of even closer ties with such a like-minded country across the world is per se in itself a sort of deterrence against any potential hybrid aggressor.
And is that the area that you could, that Serbia and NATO could cooperate better?
Of course, we can, based on always on the fact that it's up to the partner to ask to increase the level of cooperation and partnership. But this is for sure an area could be beneficial for all of us.
Yes. Thank you, Ambassador Ivančić. Serbia is currently implementing second IPAP cycle with NATO for the period of 2019 and 2021, which is another confirmation of good trend in the partnership. Can you tell us something more about this IPAP cycle and what are the main areas of cooperation and what are the plans for the future?
Well, thank you very much for that question, because IPAP, actually the individual partnership action plan, is a huge enigma in our public. IPAP is a mechanism that represents the highest form of cooperation with NATO that doesn't imply aspirations for membership. I want to point out that, as his name suggests, individual partnership action plan, it is a plan of action of cooperation that we choose as a country by ourselves. So it is not an international agreement. We defined 4 areas of cooperation. As General Vitale said, it's one of the baskets for cooperation. Those 4 areas are political and security issues, military and defense issues, public diplomacy and scientific cooperation, and the 4th one, disaster relief and crisis management. Serbia will finish the second cycles of IPAP at the end of this year, and we will start the consultations with NATO HQ on a new mechanism called ITPP, individually tailored partnership program, and this mechanism is in accordance with NATO reforms of partnership cooperation with all partners, and that new framework is called One Partner, One Plan. So we will have the consultations at the end of the years to see how we will start to work on a new mechanism, ITPP. I can say as well that concerning IPAP, very important thing, both cycles, both documents, you can find them on our website of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. So it is a proof that there is no hidden agenda on the cooperation between the Republic of Serbia and NATO.
Thank you. Ambassador Davidova, can you tell us briefly about the role of contact point NATO and the role of Bulgaria in the, as an embassy here?
Yes, thank you. Indeed, it is a privilege for us to take the function of NATO contact point embassy here in Belgrade for this and for the next year. What is at the core of our activity here is our wish to further contribute to stability and security in the region, and concretely in the case of Serbia, to further promote the partnership between Serbia and NATO in areas of mutual interest, to further assist to develop both practical cooperation and political dialogue. Of course, again, I would repeat, with full respect to the main political principle here of military neutrality, and on the other side, our aim is to contribute to creating better understanding of the core values and principles and activities of NATO here in the Serbian society. We, of course, would focus our activities and outreach to both to the institutions here in Serbia and to the civil society. And today's event is a very good example for this cooperation that is already happening, and we hope very much that we could enjoy this fruitful cooperation throughout our 2 years mandate as a contact point embassy. Of course, besides what we're doing within the framework of NATO and this NATO-Serbia partnership and as a contact point embassy, we have very well developed bilateral cooperation in each and every area, including defense cooperation. Both within NATO activities, we're contributing to the activities that have been chosen by Serbia in the individual plan, like it has been 2 years ago, almost 3 years ago, with in 2018 with this big exercise devoted to crisis management and disaster response. We are having regularly defense cooperation. Very soon, we hope very much we'll host your Minister of Defense and your Chief of Defense in Shabla shooting range for military exercise, something that became traditional. We are very well aware of the perceptions. It has been perceptions of NATO here in the Serbian society. We know very well the roots of this perception. It has been quite clearly stated by your State Secretary, Ambassador Ivancic. We're well aware. That's why we think that the role of public diplomacy is quite important. We'll devote significant efforts in this regard to have a better outreach to the whole strata of society, and to be able to contribute to improving the image of this organization.
Thanks. And when we are talking about cooperation, General Vitale, the public has noted the excellent cooperation between Serbia and NATO in the area of disaster consequence management. Still, it should be underlined that other countries in the region are also developing and improve their cooperation with the Euro-Atlantic Disaster Response Coordination Center. Do you think this is the area where the region may easily present its capabilities for integration based on joint interests?
Thank you. This is very important and I would say actual question when we talk about disaster consequence management. That definitely is an important tool, in my opinion, to foster the cooperation in the region, to foster the regional cooperation. And in that sense, working on that, we can strengthen the joint activity within the partners in the country. When we talk about disaster, we can easily observe that the disaster per se interests everybody. They do not recognize border, geography, people. It's something that unfortunately unites all of us when it comes to work together, how to face it. In that sense, this region, all the countries of this region as my country in the past, suffer major events and heavily suffer major events. And not to talk about the pandemic. This is something that heavily affected, unfortunately, all of us and still represent a huge emergency all across the world. You mentioned the Euro-Atlantic Disaster Response Coordination Center. Is a very important center. It takes, I would say, a crucial role in enhancing the cooperation at whole level inside the country and not only. And is a 24 hours, 7 days focal point to integrate, to coordinate disaster relief. And in the past, he has guided the consequent management effort on more than 45 activities. And last but not least, it took a vital role during the pandemic. Let me say a few words about the pandemic. During the pandemic, allies and the alliance as a whole stand in solidarity. Allied military personnel strengthened the capacity of civilian effort to be resilient, provided strategic relief. We set up a field hospital, deliver medical equipment, develop inside the Nato-Partnership Science for Peace and Security program innovative responses to this huge tragedy. This is something that I really need to underline. Coordination. Coordination means, in that case, a kind of response that better coordinated all the effort. But what does it mean? It means to avoid duplication, to avoid redundancy, to timely and effectively deliver the aids when they were urgent and needed. So, also in that area, how to face better the crisis, how to face better the emergency, there is room for improvement. There is room for strengthening the integration and the harmonization of the effort in the whole region with the help of the partner country in the region. And that is why we can do throughout different tools, but mainly, in my opinion, with the NATO, we mentioned many times, it means something or not. And we mention again the NATO Science for Peace and Security program. Because it's something terrible, concrete. It's something we can measure the benefit of working together side by side. So this is a program that offers expert advice, funding, promote dialogue and cooperation, connect scientists, officials, experts, dealing with security challenges with a comprehensive cross-cutting approach. And this is definitely important. Just to mention one simple example, otherwise it seems to be only talkative about words. For example, among many that also ISG, PDD mentioned before, NATO and the US Department of Homeland Security funded, developed and implemented the system to geolocalize the first responder on the ground when some tragic event happened. So as you can imagine, it's fundamentally important to try to better manage and coordinate the first effort on the ground to have the full success of a rescue operation. I could mention many of them, but the message I want to leave is this is something that is really beneficial for all of us, simply because we are trying to prevent or to face some disaster. So it's a self-explained, I would say.
For us here in the region, one of the most important issues is peace and stability. We will hear later on Commander of KFOR mission, General Federici, but what do you think, Ms. Ambassador, about the role of international security forces, KFOR, and how do you assess the cooperation between Serbia and KFOR?
Well, especially important part of the dialogue between the Republic of Serbia and NATO is the situation on Kosovo and Metohija, which is the greatest political and security challenge for Serbia. Serbia highly value and appreciate the international security presence KFOR in our province, and we are expected that they will perform their mandate given by UN Security Council 1244 in a strict, full and impact manner. In this sense, I would like to emphasize that the cooperation between Serbian armed forces and KFOR are for a long time very good cooperation on the ground. The current situation, security situation in Kosovo and Metohija requires, if not greater, then at least not to diminish the KFOR, the presence of KFOR forces. By the resolution 1244, actually the resolution 1244 defined the mandate of KFOR mission as the only legal military formation responsible for all military aspects on the ground. So that's why for Serbia is completely unacceptable the transformation of so-called Kosovo security forces to the real armed formation. In this sense, we expect that NATO will consider our priorities relating to the security situation in Kosovo and Metohija, and that they will understand us. And one more thing very important is that the KFOR will remain the status neutral in applying his mandate. Serbia is very sensitive because KFOR is the only guarantor of implementation of Brussels Agreement, of the security of Serbs, their property, our cultural and religious heritage, and we are grateful to NATO, to KFOR mission, especially to Italian, to keep safe monastery Visoki Dečani.
Yes, and Ambassador Davidova, in what ways does Bulgaria as a NATO member contribute to stability in the region?
Thank you. If I may build upon what has just been said by Ambassador Ivancic on the KFOR's role, we fully agree that KFOR continues to have an indispensable role for the security instability in the whole region, and is among key factors for maintaining stable, safe and secure environment within Kosovo itself. Bulgaria continues its contribution. We have been for a long period contributing to KFOR. This is part of our policy for promoting security and stability in the region. Again, if I go back to what has been said, there is no change in KFOR mandate. It continues its activities under the Security Council Resolution 1244. There are no intentions for any drawdown, downsize of KFOR. There are not conditions yet, and any change in KFOR posture would be conditions-based and not calendar-driven.
Thank you. General Vitale, numerous public opinion polls point to the negative attitude of Serbia's citizens towards NATO and potential membership in the alliance. However, cooperation and partnership have generated mutual trust that is not sufficiently presented to the public. Do you believe that there is a room for improvement, or at least for the correction of the current narrative in this segment?
I wouldn't be here if I didn't believe of that. It's one of my job. I would say that most probably the biggest challenge for NATO in Serbia is public diplomacy, actually. Since people do not see how much we work together side by side on daily basis. And the information gap is still very, very considerable in that respect. The public opinion in Serbia, in my opinion, is pretty unaware on NATO. And the mechanism that NATO put in place to establish partnership and cooperation with all partners. And on the other hand, what we are seeing a lot of disinformation aimed at eroding trust on our alliance, on NATO as a political military organization. And this is something, as alliance, we try to respond to this with fact, being transparent, showing an unprecedented solidarity among us. We are always transparent when we talk about what we do. And we are always ready to exchange views about NATO, its principle, with all people who would be interested in doing that. And we try to counter this disinformation, showing our transparency, sending clear message that NATO as organization is always ready and solidar among allies and also with partners. And this is something that we will continue to do, talking about the alliance, its principle, its dynamic, its democratic values, and our cooperation with Serbia, our partnership with Serbia. Because many people in this country are still unaware that NATO is a political military organization. I repeat, political military organization with 30 democracies inside. And if they would know, would appreciate better that among this country there are the biggest investors, the main economic partners of this beautiful country, it would be definitely important. This is why we are trying to be in contact on daily basis with media, civil society, key opinion leaders, NGO, academics, because we consider this part of the society very important to counter disinformation and to better deliver the factual. We are talking about factual, not answer to the lies with the lies, but answer to the lies, as I said, with fact. Our public diplomacy division, who is led by Assistant Secretary General by Belgrade, that talked before, is doing a tremendous job in co-sponsoring event, seminar, roundtable, online event to better deliver this kind of message. Let me conclude simply by saying that for us, public opinion is important. We take into account public opinion in all our activity. And I know that being a NATO soldier, a NATO member, NATO is still a controversial issue. But let me say, it's really time to move forward. And what we are doing together with Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with Ministry of Defense, with all the other stakeholders in this country is showing exactly this, that we are moving forward. Because there is only one way to reach benefit on both sides and to reach a better future for our young people. And this is not hypocrisy or demagogy. Thank you.
Ambassador Ivančić, does Serbian public understand that the cooperation and the partnership? From what we have heard, that partnership is solid, covering many different aspects of cooperation. But what is your impression about public opinion here, and are there areas of cooperation between Serbia and NATO that you see as a high quality cooperation and for which the Serbian public does not know much about? You mentioned something, but...
You are right. Partnership between Serbia and NATO is solid with positive agenda for the future, but at the same time, it is clear when you mention NATO in Serbia, the majority of our citizens still immediately think about 1999 bombing. Many people in Serbia lost their loved ones, which is why it is extremely important that Secretary General Stoltenberg on numerous occasions express his regrets for the civilian victims of the bombing and extended his condolences to the families. Before him, nobody have done that. So, in that, regarding the, I would like to point out that it is not our goal to promote Serbia-NATO cooperation. Neither NATO expects from us to do that, but the partnership cooperation between Serbia and NATO is a very important part of foreign policy. So we want to do that on a very transparent and public way, and the best way to do that is with the truth and facts. Concerning the second part of your question, yes, one more thing. Our partnership and our solidarity, we proved when we sent the donation to Italy, for example, when we immunized citizens from North Macedonia or Montenegro. But we do that in a public way, and we say we helped our neighbors. But nobody said Serbia helped their NATO partners, like Italy, like North Macedonia, Montenegro. So the journalists, they have their role as well in that public diplomacy, public building some public awareness of that, of the benefits and of that cooperation, let's say. We mentioned it several times, Science for Peace and Security program. It is very important program because it is, the projects are on a scientific and technological cooperation. From 2006, when we became a member of PFP program, we have completed 40 projects. Now we have 10 ongoing projects. We gave a lot of attention to the cooperation through SPS, and let me mention how Serbia is engaged in this program. Recently, NATO presented on his website 3 young women making huge strides in innovation and technology, with the support, of course, of NATO Science for Peace and Security program. Among those 3 women were our young scientist, Željka Antić. She's a research professor at the Vinča Institute of Nuclear Science. Also, in March, scientists from Serbia, Montenegro, and Slovenia started to work together on a brand new NATO SPS energy security project called Supercar. This multi-year project will develop a new generation of lithium-free batteries and supercapacitors based on eco-friendly carbon nanotechnology. And NATO SPS program is financing that project. So there is really a lot of possibility of cooperation through SPS program.
Yeah, that's great news. I hope my colleagues, journalists, will report on that more than they maybe already.
Those are young scientists, young students, and they've done a lot of good things.
Yes,
I have one thing. For sure, dear Ambassador, we don't expect that you promote, but you did a tremendous job because you promote in an exceptional way what we are doing together. So I'm really delighted to see how we are working together. This is the best spot we can do to our audience. And let me simply finish by saying, and thank you very much again to the President Vučić, because he's invited our SecGen to celebrate the 15th anniversary of the partnership. So Serbia is very happy to celebrate with us our story of success, as I said earlier.
Yes, we're at the end of the conference. Do you have, Ambassador Davidova, some message for the Serbian public?
Thank you. As a final remark, indeed, creating better understanding for mutual benefits of this partnership will help improving NATO's image here. And what exactly has been said by Ambassador Ivančić, participating in different projects, including under Science for Peace and Security program, and understanding the benefits in different areas, not just directly related to security. On the other side, helping developing resilience of Serbia to all modern challenges to the security. This is something that will improve the image of the alliance here. And for us as a contact point embassy, having in mind that the public diplomacy is the main area of activity, we intend to focus our efforts in this regard, and of course with the help of all of you. And in concluding, I would just like to refer to what has been stated in Serbia's PFP presentation document years ago. There the partnership between Serbia and NATO is presented as a complementary to reaching the objective of European Union membership. And this is something that we should always keep in mind. This is something that will help to reach this strategic objective, bringing more stability, security, and reaching this final aim, joining European Union.
Thank you very much for your participating and for this panel. We heard a lot of maybe new things that we didn't know. We will continue this conference with remarks by Commander of KFOR mission, General Franco Federici, and by Mr. Atanas Zaprianov, former Deputy Minister of Defense of the Republic of Bulgaria, and after that we will have a second panel.
Your Excellencies, Ambassadors, distinguished military attaché, dear guests, I am Major General Franco Federici, the 25th Commander of the Kosovo Force. It is a great honor and a privilege for me to have the opportunity to provide you with an insight of the KFOR role in providing a safe and secure environment in Kosovo, as well as its interactions with the respective Serbian military authorities. Let me start by saying that NATO is firmly committed to stability in the Western Balkans through the KFOR peacekeeping force in Kosovo, with a total strength of about 3,500 soldiers, currently provided by 27 nations, both NATO members and partners. KFOR is NATO's longest-running operation. It is a successful story for the alliance and its partners. KFOR has been helping the stabilization and reconstruction of Kosovo to become a safer place for the past 22 years. Since 1999, KFOR performs its activities cooperating and assisting the United Nations, the European Union, and other international actors in order to support the development of a stable and peaceful Kosovo, as well as the development of professional, democratic, and multi-ethnic security structures within the institutions in Kosovo. Under the authority of the United Nations, NATO has been leading a peace support operation in Kosovo since 12 June 1999, in support of a wider international effort to build peace and stability in the area. The KFOR mandate has remained unchanged, contributing to maintain a safe and secure environment and to guarantee the freedom of movement for all communities in Kosovo, in accordance with the United Nations Security Council Resolution 1244. We remain committed to moving towards a smaller, more flexible, deterrent presence when the security situation will allow. We are also committed to remain in Kosovo as long as deemed necessary, because the KFOR mission is based on the conditions on the ground and not on a fixed timeline. KFOR is performing its mission to ensure a better future with special regards to the youth. For this reason, through our projects and donations, we continue to dedicate our efforts in supporting any initiative which might improve the future of the population, with a special eye for the youngest generations. KFOR carries out not only typical military activities. Many projects are intended to support in an impartial way all institutions and communities in Kosovo, especially those organizations which take care of the weakest parts of the society, and those promoting education and inter-ethnic coexistence. I would like now to turn to the security situation, which is currently calm and fully under control. We have no reason to be worried about any possible disturbance or violent disorder. KFOR works in close cooperation with local and international security organizations for the benefit of all communities in Kosovo. In case of any warning which could potentially affect the security situation, KFOR is ready to adopt, in close coordination with the Kosovo police and ULEX, all the necessary measures required to maintain a safe and secure environment in Kosovo. However, the good cooperation of KFOR with the local institution, as well as with the Serbian armed forces and all the other nations surrounding the KFOR area of responsibility, confirms that there is no immediate threat to the stability in Kosovo and in the region. KFOR maintains constantly a real-time situational awareness, and there are currently no signs of possible tensions. The security situation in us is a result of many factors, such as economic, politics, and welfare. Everything that could affect the security situation is monitored day by day. NATO remains committed to the security and stability of Kosovo. It has contributed to the progressive normalization of the security situation in the region, and for the past 21 years, KFOR has been helping the stabilization and the reconstruction of Kosovo to become a safer place. In this framework, the cooperation and the mutual activities with the Serbian armed forces are excellent at all levels, starting from my level down to the units on the ground. I periodically meet the chiefs of defense of the countries bordering with the KFOR area of responsibility in order to increase dialogue and mutual military understanding. And this happens regularly also with Serbia. The KFOR Joint Implementation Commission keeps daily contacts with its Serbian armed forces counterpart, and the cooperation going on is at a very high level. Furthermore, we regularly carry out synchronized KFOR and Serbian armed forces patrols along the administrative boundary line to contribute in maintaining a peaceful and a positive atmosphere. It is worth mentioning that we will soon celebrate the 500th meeting between the Serbian Armed Forces and KFOR Joint Implementation Commission. A symbolic ceremony will be held in mid-June in order to mark the event. Coming to the end of my brief presentation, I would like to point out that NATO has to continue to be strongly committed to Kosovo's security, contributing to maintaining a safe and secure environment and freedom of movement for all communities in Kosovo, in line with the United Nations mandate. NATO remains committed to moving towards a smaller, more flexible, deterrent presence when the security situation will allow. NATO is also committed to remain in Kosovo as long as deemed necessary, because again the KFOR mission is based on the conditions on the ground and not on a fixed timeline. Thank you for the opportunity given to me delivering this speech to you, and thank you for your attention.
Ladies and gentlemen, as a representative of the Republic of Bulgaria, an European Union and NATO's nation, and most importantly, a good neighbor in Southeast Europe, I have the honor to address this timely event that is focused on highly relevant topics. Bulgaria is committed to strengthening peace and building stability in the Western Balkans. One of the most noticeable dimensions of this commitment is our contribution to the KFOR mission. Unquestionably, it provides a safe and secure environment and guarantees freedom of movement for the benefit of all communities in Kosovo. NATO allies are firmly committed to KFOR and to its important mission. Being a NATO ally, Bulgaria fully supports the normalization process between Belgrade and Pristina. The dialogue is the right path to find a solution that respects the rights of all communities, as well as to achieve a lasting peace and stability. Today, we are facing different security challenges. That is why developing the partnership with NATO can bring real benefits to Serbia and the wider region. From the Bulgarian perspective, the European Union and Euro-Atlantic integration is the future of our region. We have been in NATO since 2004 and in the European Union since 2007, and this has brought enormous benefits to our country and our society. The Euro-Atlantic choice of Bulgaria is irreversible. Let me reiterate that NATO, including Bulgaria, fully respects Serbia's sovereign choice to military neutrality policy. Fortunately, Serbia is a long-standing partner of our North Atlantic Alliance and the allies are committed to building a strong partnership with Belgrade. This year, we mark 15 years since Serbia joined the NATO's Partnership for Peace. We are close partners, and I hope that our relations will be further developed. Although NATO and Serbia have so far developed practical cooperation with tangible results on many areas, the best is yet to come. Today, the whole region faces various risks and threats that require greater awareness and resolve to tackle them. Despite the negative aggravating impact of the COVID-19, coupled the hybrid activities of external actors aimed at preventing the Euro-Atlantic cooperation and integration of the Western Balkans, I believe that standing together is the key to resist malign external influences. Any external meddling in domestic democratic processes is unacceptable. NATO, and especially Bulgaria as a member state, will continue to work hard in order to promote stability, security, cooperation, and integration in the whole region. Concerning the coronavirus, we should remember that NATO and individual allies and partners have provided critical medical assistance to countries in the Western Balkans. For instance, KFOR in Kosovo provides assistance to dozens of municipalities for the benefit of all communities. This is another example of the alliance's positive role in bringing more stability. Bulgaria has always been ready to share its experience and provide support to any country in the region that aspires to join NATO. We have always been open to support our partnership as well. Our firm belief is that the NATO's open door policy to all the countries in the region brings stability and promotes cooperation and reforms. The enlargement of NATO has been a historical success as it has promoted stability and prosperity in the last 3 decades. Moreover, it supports the European Union applicant countries in their reform progress. For sure, European Union and NATO enlargements has made Europe a better and safer place. As security attracts economic investments and therefore promotes prosperity, NATO must keep its door open to those who want to join, and it must develop its partnership to the fullest extent possible. Last but not least, as a Bulgarian representative in this context, I would like to point out the good bilateral relations between Bulgaria and Serbia, especially regarding economy and defense cooperation. As a positive defense cooperation example, we could point out the traditional military exercise Shaba. This is favorable to further developing in genuine added value partnerships under NATO PFP and European Union. Thank you for your attention.
We are now continuing with the conference, Serbia and NATO Partnership for Future, the panel which is dedicated to the perspective of this relationship. So as we have heard from the previous speakers, Serbia is committed to the partnership with NATO based on a policy of military neutrality, but also the openness towards further cooperation. NATO, as we have heard, understands and respects this position of Serbia. So what is the perspective of these relations? Why these relations are important, how they are changing in the region where Serbia is neutral and surrounded with members of the alliance? These are the topics that we will be talking about for the following maybe even 1 hour. We'll see how long this will take. So with us today are Mr. Dragan Šutanovac, President of the Council for Security Strategic Policy, Dragan Đukanović, Professor at the Faculty of Political Sciences and President of the Center for Foreign Policy, and Zoran Dragičić, Member of Parliament, Member of the Defense and Internal Affairs Committee, and Professor at the Faculty of Security Studies. Thank you for joining us today, and to begin, I would start with you, Mr. Šutanovac, but this is a question for all participants. What is, in your opinion, the perspective of the relationship between Serbia and NATO, looking from this moment, having in mind the previous 15 years of experience? So, as you have said, Serbia has been a member of the Partnership for Peace program with NATO for the past 15 years, and as part of this program, Serbia has many possibilities for cooperation. A large part of this has been done. There is even more room for improvement in the future. I think Serbia has to understand the essence, a thing that is often ignored, which is that these 15 years have seen a complete change of the environment in which we live. Practically only a few countries that were members of NATO 15 years ago, so excluding Bosnia and Herzegovina, practically all countries are members of NATO today, and we are all cooperating with them. This cooperation can be in the security sector, which is necessary, but on the other hand, Serbia today, if we look at our greatest exporters, we are exporting into NATO countries, which is not something we mention often, but it is our economic interest to keep extraordinary contact with these countries. So another thing is that in 2007 or 2008, our changes in the Serbian armed forces occurred. So the Serbian armed forces were standardized according to NATO standards, and interoperability and the capacities of our armed forces have been increased. So our policy today is a policy of neutrality, and this policy unfortunately is not recognized internationally. This is the will that is expressed through a document in Serbia, which does not practically mean much, but internally it does mean to us here. And this in essence means that Serbia has no allies, which I don't think is a good thing, because a country of this size was never prosperous in the past, nor was it secure in the way in which we want if it doesn't have allies next to it. I don't mean allies only in the security sector, such as NATO or CSTO, but also the European Union. Today, even though all countries here strive to be members of the EU, we are not a member. And as I have said, almost all countries are members of NATO. So there's a disbalance that is currently not jeopardizing Serbia, but we will see in the future how this can be leveled and how Serbia will relate itself to NATO. So, Mr. Đukanović.
Professor Đukanović, do you agree with this assessment that Serbia is isolated without any allies, and how do you see the future? To an extent it is, in addition to continuation of a dispersive foreign policy relying on several actors, we do not have strategic partnership with key partners such as the US, unlike all countries in our environment. In that sense, it seems to me that we are in some kind of a position that is not adequate, especially when we analyze opening of some sensitive matters in the region, or closure of some sensitive matters such as Belgrade-Pristina dialogue or circumstances in Bosnia. It seems to me that 15 years after entering PFP, we have had some sort of continuity and discontinuity. And in 2000, the official orientation of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia was full NATO membership. Only 1 year later, independent Serbia of entering independent Serbia to PFP. 1 year later, they declared military neutrality, and it substantially altered relations with NATO. And we have progressed so far. We've reached IPAP, and that's the maximum level of cooperation with NATO for a country that does not have aspiration to become a member. Well, the future of relations between Serbia and NATO is increased partnership. That is a partnership that will imply cooperation in curbing certain challenges and threats, such as organized crime and other threats, pandemic, etc. Serbia received assistance from NATO during the pandemic of COVID-19. Although it's not a member of NATO, there are lots of possibilities for this cooperation to be improved. And in spite of the long-nourished skepticism by the domestic public opinion in the last decade and a half, it seems to me that there is a possibility to improve that cooperation. However, given the experiences of other countries in the region, no one realized their national interests confronting with NATO. So it seems to me that a necessary measure of compromise with this alliance has to be found, given that we are surrounded by NATO countries. Professor Dragicic, I'm asking you as an MP, here you are the only one who can create some sort of decisions, and you're a member of the Defense and Internal Affairs Committee in the Parliament. We have heard the comments of Serbia's neutrality policy. Do you expect any surprises that some things might move to a certain direction towards strengthening relations with NATO? In addition to being a member to Defense and the Internal Affairs Committee, I'm a member of the Serbia's parliamentary delegation in NATO Parliamentary Assembly for the last 5 years. And my experiences from the work of the NATO parliamentary delegation are very positive. Serbia is a respected partner in there. And generally speaking, in the relations between Serbia and NATO, I don't see any problems. Can they be improved? What is the future? The border was set the moment when Serbia decided to conduct the military neutrality policy, not to be militarily neutral, because military neutrality in legal forms should have to be internationally recognized. This form of neutrality can be called the policy of neutrality that Serbia leads. Even this neutrality is exhausted at the position concluded. The position Serbia will not become a NATO member. So it seems in certain moment that relations between Serbia and NATO are clear. Serbia wants partnership. Serbia wants to work with NATO. And here we have like second APAP. That's at the end this year. It shows that Serbia wishes cooperation. On the other hand, Serbia has, and it should be a single process, Serbia wishes to become an EU member. If you look into the NATO members and EU members, we can see that the largest number of NATO member countries are EU members, and vice versa. EU members are at the same time NATO members. Therefore, European security system or EU security system is relies on NATO, and there are the principles not to duplicate capacities. What NATO already has is not developed by the EU separately. What is very important for us, in addition to military cooperation, when you speak about NATO, the first thing is it's about a defense alliance. But one mustn't forget that it's a political alliance, that's a security alliance, that it is an economic alliance. And if you look through the Science for Peace program, that is a NATO program for science program promotion. There are so many projects that are of a non-military character. And how many, if you look into how many projects Serbia has got, how many of them Serbia has completed, if you look at the civil defense program or emergency situations response program, which also relies on NATO, this cooperation is more than good. There's been a stoppage when this decision was made that there shouldn't be any participation in international military activities. And this suspension created a problem primarily to us, but we compared the headlines from the media, especially tabloid ones, with the real situation. If you look at the media headlines and tabloid, it looks as if Serbia and NATO are on the verge of war. And on the other hand, you look at the situation on the ground, you see very good relations. And when we speak about relationships, one should look into relations with, not only with Brussels as NATO as a multi-political organization, but you also have to take into account the bilateral relations that are established with NATO member countries, such as Platinum Wolf exercise that we exercise. And the only member who is not a NATO member is Bosnia and Herzegovina. Everybody else is. If we take into consideration our bilateral exercises with our today's host, Bulgarians, Romanians, or with the United States, we have truly developed cooperation with the High National Guard. If we take everything into one context, and if we take into consideration what Mr. Stanovic and Djukanovic said, and overall relations with NATO members, you can conclude that the cooperation is really good, and I expect that it will be further expanded. In these 15 years, how much have security, how do the situation has changed? How do you view cooperation with NATO, PFP, and future cooperation? That's a question for you all. Many things have changed. So we have a completely reconfigured security situation in Western Balkans when you compare it to 2006. That was the period of the initial post-conflict stabilization of the region, but we have to take into consideration that a successful open door policy has been implemented. That's a NATO open door policy. That's openness towards all West Balkans countries. And meanwhile, Croatia and Albania first in 2009 joined NATO. Then in 2017, Montenegro joined, and in 2020, North Macedonia joined. I believe that successful enlargement policy will continue, and it is almost certain that Bosnia and Herzegovina, in spite of the current problems, now it's in the ante room, given that the action plan for membership has been activated in 2019, and regardless of Belgrade-Pristina relations I also believe that Kosovo is certain to join NATO in the near future. Therefore, this NATO enlargement policy is continuing. And unlike the EU enlargement policy that stopped in 2013 with Croatia for geopolitical reasons, I believe the NATO enlargement policy has continued, and I believe the NATO presence of the alliance in the region will be strengthened. As a result of in the last 15 years, many things have changed, and when we speak about security situation, by this we mean security challenges, risks, and threats on one side. And on the other, we look into capacities of the states, regions, and the international community to respond to challenges. It's certain that the Balkans has changed in the last 15 years, although historically it's a short period of time, but in the security and political sense, it's a long period of time. What has changed what my colleague Djukanovic said, except for Bosnia and Herzegovina, all other countries have joined NATO, and Bosnia and Herzegovina will join soon. And NATO maintains this open door policy. What is for certain, that is that the Western Balkans has a great conflict potential. And where do you see the great threats? The main conflicting potential is the solution of Kosovo issue. Then Bosnia and Herzegovina, after Dayton Agreement onwards, not much has been done on stabilization of Bosnia and Herzegovina. We see the most recent case of the appointment of the High Representative These are the crisis centers that have a great crisis potential. When I say crisis potential, a crisis can develop in different directions. It does not have to be negative. If a crisis is developed in a positive way, for example, the relations between Belgrade and Pristina, if a sustainable solution is identified for Bosnia and Herzegovina, we can speak about stabilization. In any case, NATO is a good security mechanism. If we take into consideration the security situations from the past, for example, the case of Cyprus, that unless Turkey and Greece had been both NATO members, we would have had not one, but several armed conflicts between the two countries. NATO is a good mechanism for preservation of peace. And looking, generally speaking, with all due respect to the EU and the UN, peace in the Balkans is maintained thanks to NATO. If we look into KFOR, it is a mission of the UN, but these are actually NATO forces on the ground. And whatever the anti-Western politicians and analysts can be speaking about, if they speak against NATO, against the US, I always remind them that it would be really bad. And we always ask that KFOR shouldn't be reducing its presence. I just want to conclude that NATO is the only efficient and effective mechanism that can preserve peace in the Western Balkans. Mr. Žutanovac, have we reached the point that it's only NATO that can save us? When I say Western Balkans, I believe that they are not only thinking about crisis. I see the only possible problem in Kosovo and Metohija. We had the situation on 17th of March 2004 that if KFOR hadn't been in Kosovo, if it hadn't reacted, in my opinion, it could have reacted faster. But if they hadn't reacted, we would have had a serious reason for wider military operations. I wouldn't say justified, but if it is about violation of human rights, homicide of civilians, that could cause a serious destabilization of the whole region. Judging by the documents adopted by the countries in the region and Serbia, our security strategies are saying that we are not seriously threatened by any countries in the region. There is a security challenging risk of threats in Kosovo. That challenge risk of threat is part of some organized crime or problems that are emerging from this famous narcotic route that runs through this region, and that is what the Western countries are dealing with as their focus of interest. But the actual NATO enlargement is inevitable, whether we wish it or not. And I believe in a certain moment, most people will realize that it is a patriotic act and interest that our children in the future should not be speaking about this topic, that nobody should be asking them whether they're living in a crisis area or not, that they should be living in a safe area, that can travel everywhere, that can get jobs everywhere in that zone. And that is something that will be happening in the future, whether it's going to be in the next 5 or 6 years or in some longer period of time. But the question is when the people will be waking up and realizing that we, as one part of this region, is not something that is something between East and the West. NATO is in the East, NATO is in the North, NATO is in the East, in the West, in the North and the South. EU is all around, and we're surrounded by NATO. We are part of NATO, although we're not a NATO member. There is another segment, and I hope that I have spoken about that in addition to policy and in addition to the fact that there is some reflection about NATO related to 1990s. When it comes to previous offers from NATO, that we should be doing some exercises with NATO countries or with NATO itself. the general staff was always accepting these offers and participated with pleasure, not only because soldiers appreciate other soldiers, and they do that if they are honorable, and most of them are, and that was also the interest of our military, and that was the interest of our security and Serbia's citizens, and we have to listen to experts. And experts say we need this, from equipment to training, and then there is some policy that's, then we have to reduce the rhetoric and see what our interest is. You cannot be against NATO and practically have at work everything that comes from NATO countries. And you cannot only appreciate NATO and act as if you're against. There is no logic except for the memories of 1990s, and that is the legacy of, it can be said, the bad NATO reactions, but primarily bad Serbian policy from that time, because we allowed ourselves to enter war operations against countries that used to be bleeding for Serbia's liberation. It is rarely said that more French soldiers died at Thessaloniki, French, than Serbian soldiers. And why can't Serbs respect that tradition we often refer to? And then we end up referring to 1990s, where we had some bad situation which led us to a conflict with traditionally friendly countries. I will remind you of another interesting thing. People who study NATO relations, not only the region, but the overall Europe, they'll see that Germany joined NATO in 1955. Only 10 years after the bloody long World War II, Germany realized it was its interest to be part of a common security umbrella, and that EU project led to the fact that we have no conflicts in NATO area since 1945. But we still feel the 1990s through certain sparks that occur in the region. And this primarily comes from the politicians. As you have said, the national security strategy, there is no military threat. And these are the documents prepared by the experts from the MOD and MFA. There is this rhetoric that is periodically reinforced in the media prior to some elections or some events. What is interesting, if we allow the military leaderships of the countries in the region, they would they wouldn't have a single problem to reach an agreement, and it would end up after a short meeting. In the light of all that, a question from you, because you're in the parliament: to what an extent certain decisions or announcements of certain countries' decisions could affect these little sparks that could appear and reflect onto the security situation and PFP, and by this I mean possible return of conscription, and we've heard a similar idea from Croatia. Generally speaking, this is not too serious.
No, in general, these sparks that we can hear between Belgrade or Zagreb, yeah, but this is the decision is based on law. Yeah, Serbia has not made a decision yet to reintroduce compulsory service. This decision is still being considered. But what do you think about this decision? I think just like the decision to stop conscription was not just off the top of someone's head. This decision also has to be analyzed thoroughly, and I think we first of all need to take into account the opinion of experts and not the politicians. But you are in the profession, so what do you think? I don't have all the relevant information right now, so when I have all the relevant information, I will be able to give an opinion about this. So there is a huge question here. On the one hand, you have the security reasons for this is a group of a cluster of reasons which may require us to reintroduce conscription. But on the other hand, we have the issue of finance on the third side, we have the issue of demographics. So this is not an easy question to answer in a single sentence. So Serbia, given its decision to not join NATO, given its decision to rely on its own forces for defense, we have to be aware of the fact that such a political decision, if we want to back it up, we need to have a much larger army than right now. We have to have larger reserves, larger investments in the armed forces, because we don't have the luxury that NATO members have. So, for example, Croatia, if we look at Croatia, when we spar with any country in the region, when we compare the numbers of our forces and their forces, we need to understand that there are thousands of fighter jets and aircraft carriers. There are millions of soldiers and navies, but behind every single country of these countries, every single country has more soldiers than they have people, inhabitants. So, no, according to Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty Agreement, so this implies the answer of the entire organization, the entire NATO. So if we compare our capacities and the capacities of NATO, there is no way for us to match NATO militarily. But these are not only military threats. As Mr. Šutanovac said, he's completely right. If we look at the strategies in the surroundings, no one says that these countries are militarily threatened, but if we take into account the fact that we cannot share our security, for the greatest extent, we cannot share it. We have the bilateral option to react together with other countries to organized crime or natural disasters, but we don't have full access to all tools and mechanisms that NATO members do. This is why we need to think about this. The policy of neutrality is costly. We cannot maintain neutrality, and our citizens need to know that we have to allocate much more to defense. This is no longer an issue of whether we will do this. Our citizens need to know that we need to engage much more, either through conscription, but younger people than us need to iron out their reserve uniforms. So no one will defend Serbia except for us. Just the fact that we are not in NATO, this issue that we have that other countries around us don't have, it makes things difficult. Okay, but Professor Đukanović and then Mr. Šutanovac, do you understand this kind of arguments when it comes to the potential decision to reintroduce compulsory military service? So, to start, I have to say that I'm not an expert in this field. I have my own personal opinion, which is not in favor of reintroduction of this. This is my personal opinion, that Serbia does not need military service. We need to perform a cost-benefit analysis. Every choice, and the choice of any country to be militarily neutral, has its price, just like any choice that we make in life. So we need to make a cost-benefit analysis. We need to see if this is viable, how much this will burden the state budget, how much it's possible how many young people can be conscripted. We need to see that there's a conscientious objection as an option. So this is an option, a decision that cannot be made easily without a thorough and deep analysis. So we need to assess regional challenges, global challenges that we are facing in the field of security. There are numerous challenges that we need to analyze. So are there any analyses being conducted right now, to your knowledge? There are serious analyses going on. So, Mr. Šutanovac, you already said that you don't like this decision, but what are your arguments? This cannot be, I'm talking about the announced decision. Yeah, but this is a decision, this is like waking up in a nightmare where you realize you're on your own. So when you're alone, there are few of you. So I think there should be more of us, but this is in the end us. I'm saying this because the Serbian armed forces have three missions. The first mission is to defend the country, the second is to participate in peacekeeping operations abroad, and the third is to help the civilian population. So if you look at the part where Serbian armed forces can maybe not meet their task, is the third task of helping civilians, because we saw a lot of mistakes back in 2013 and 14, and we should have an active reserve who would 3,000 or 4,000 people who would serve the country every year. So those who are propagating the reintroduction of the armed forces in high schools, there's an opposite here. We're investing large funds into equipment, and I have an understanding. I understand this. I'm sorry that we didn't have finances before, but we do need to refresh our equipment. But at the same, while you're investing in this, on the other hand, the interest in joining the army is falling. So you would do this. You would force young people to join the army, and believe me, we won't make them into better people or into regular soldiers. So Serbia is not militarily threatened, and which is another thing that is important, is that all armies in the surroundings are professional armed forces. So if we analyze this and say who will defend us, then you just have to analyze who would attack us. So if all these countries have professional armies like our armed forces, I don't think any of them have voluntary service that we have right now. I don't see any hostile countries in the surroundings, but even if they were, I don't think that an individual country can threaten Serbia's security, and I think this would be detrimental to both sides. So yeah, you gave me a great introduction to the next question. So are we investing enough in the military? This is a huge question, because the news that reach the media there are various donations, but we don't have. So the armed forces are equipped using a plan for equipping the armed forces. But is this in line with the Partnership for Peace? Okay, so there's an interesting thing here to say. I can say this right now. No one came from NATO and said that we cannot have this or that. So Bulgaria recently had MiGs 29, and no one said that they cannot have this equipment. So Serbian interest at this moment, when buying airplanes, I would buy new aircraft. I would look at our pilots and our possibilities to maintain this. And this is the Russian platform of MiG-29. I don't know why, when we're buying helicopters, why we should buy from three producers, because this implies three types of maintenance, three types of pilots. So these costs are multiplied. So because the General Staff says that this is good for them, I believe that they thought well about this, because back when I was thinking about this, when we wanted to buy these howitzers that are used in the US, we were told that this is not a priority, but there is another priority, and then we bought according to priority. So the Serbian armed forces need to say what they need, and then the politics and the finances need to enable this to be purchased in the given circumstances. This is something that is not clear in the public often. Who does what and who is there when something is being purchased or sold. So the Serbian armed forces make decisions on purchasing and selling the systems that are no longer in use.
Let's go back to the perspective of relations with NATO. We spoke about some internal decisions and announcements to decisions. To what an extent our relations with the states outside NATO can affect our cooperation with NATO and our partnership? Professor Dragicic. As for NATO, I have never heard, as a member of the parliamentary delegation, and earlier on, through all the contacts I've had with the people from the alliance, no one has ever said that Serbia cannot and will not cooperate with anyone else. Cooperation through PFP that we have with NATO and with individual countries it has never been conditioned with the termination of cooperation with another country. In that sense, NATO does not set any boundaries. For our European perspective, what can be a problem? That is harmonization with the foreign and security EU policy, specifically when it comes to sanctions to Russia. Serbia has not introduced these sanctions because in this moment we have no interest to introduce sanctions, but we will be required if, and I hope that the upcoming summit between Presidents Biden and Putin will give a positive impulse to relations between the United States and Russia, and in that case our position will be much easier. For example, but in Brussels, does Brussels notice relations when it comes to defense and security? Do they notice relations with non-NATO countries? Do they notice relations towards with Belarus? Of course, that can be important too. These are the relations between NATO. One has to take into account that NATO is a military political organization which includes sovereign countries, and not a single country lost its sovereignty by being a NATO member. And NATO members have different attitudes towards Russia, Belarus. NATO creates its policy in a different way than the EU does. And in that sense, I do not see that I see that we have I don't think we'll have any problems because of our relations with Russia, because of the fact that we have not introduced sanctions. But many countries that have introduced sanctions to Russia have better economic relations with Russia than we do. We look into relations between Germany and Russia, and relations between the US and Russia. We see that there are considerable differences. Serbia has no pressure about whom it will cooperate with and whom not. Professor Djukanovic, do you notice any pressure or attention to some political decisions when we speak about partnership with NATO? When it comes to in predominant areas of in the public arena, pressure is always mentioned when it comes to NATO, although it's not the case in reality. And NATO always says that Serbia can make its own decision of where it wishes to be, whether it's going to keep military neutrality or whether it's going to reconsider that. I don't see any pressures in that area. And on the other hand, we have to say, and we have to put the question in the context, the matter of passing decision on military neutrality. This decision was a preparation for a very fast decision on political neutrality that was supposed to imply a blockade of Euro-Atlantic path and the EU path. And unfortunately, many political actors participated in that. In some way, a wider emotionally caused consensus was created in Serbia, with what followed up several months later, this declaration of Kosovo independence. And as long as there is the concept of military neutrality, as long as it is explained as not only distancing from the West, but coming close to Russia and China, as long as this is the case, we will be facing with a case that the public will have a better perception of exercises with the Eastern countries, then instead of objectively seeing that the number of exercises held by the Serbian armed forces with NATO is much higher, which the media will never mention. Or this is mentioned maybe in a few lines. It's interesting that this current exercise has received almost no coverage in the media. We have a serious problem as a country that is an EU candidate that has opened numerous chapters, has got only 56% harmonization with EU foreign policy, and this does not correspond with our status and our intentions that we claim to have, and that is the EU membership, and that will demand a fundamental change if the EU membership is a real or proclaimed objective of our country, as we hear. These are the key challenges, and I hope that in the upcoming NATO summit we shall receive similar signals that there are no pressures on Serbia. That is my next question. On the 14th of June, there will be a NATO summit after several years, and some main topics are Afghanistan, Belarus, China. Do you expect that the Serbian authorities will be listening, and what kind of messages should we listen to that could be important for us in Serbia and the region? I think we should first look for our own interest in these areas. Of course, they will deal with Ukraine, Belarus, North Korea, Middle East. These are all important topics for an organization such as NATO. For us, cybersecurity would be important because Serbia would need to join that, because we are not part of cybersecurity. We're not even part of the Center of Excellence in Finland that was established by EDU, and we are not part of the NATO's Center of Excellence that's established by NATO in Tallinn, Estonia. In this moment, when it comes to where the greatest threat is, I believe we as a country, we are not ready for to defend ourselves from cyber attacks. A few years ago, water supply system in Novi Sad was blocked by some hackers. And so it's not organized military units, but hackers. And that is where Serbia should be looking for its partnership with NATO as firmly as possible, instead of seeking for partnership with Moscow, which is actually generator of some negative energy in cyber world, and they have some office in St. Petersburg, and that's what Serbia should be looking for. On the other hand, strengthening relations with NATO, these military exercises. I will remind you that Serbia has sent its soldiers to a number of peacekeeping operations. They are all working in accordance with NATO standard. UN works in accordance with NATO standard. Any exercise with a NATO country increases our interoperability, and a military exercise with the Russian or Belarusian side serves for marketing promotion, and our military does not receive the capability that is necessary for PKOs. And these are things that are overly emphasized, just like in every other marketing, and there are things that are not visible, and they're often more important than these that are overly emphasized. What do you think, Professor Dragišić? What would you like to hear when there is this NATO summit? What is important for Serbia and the region? That we cannot be isolated. For us, what Mr. Šutanovac has said, it's important that we should be working on increasing our own capacities through cooperation with NATO in the areas that are most critical. That is definitely the cybersecurity. And in the last 2 or 3 summits, NATO addresses special attention to cybersecurity, and it's also emergency situations and response. Also defense from hybrid attacks, because Serbia is largely exposed to hybrid attacks. And these are most often connected to Russian Federation, which realistically is responsible for many forms of endangering Europe through fake news, through different influences and social networks. These are all the questions of exceptional importance for Serbia. On the other hand, we had an opportunity to see terrorism that is changing through different forms of terrorism. Every NATO summit since 2001 onwards is dedicated to terrorism. Then there is cyber terrorism, which is a huge threat. And we speak about cyber defense. Without relying on partners from NATO, we can hardly reach the necessary level of efficiency And of course, through all these exercises that we already have with NATO, raising the level of interoperability is of special importance, not only because of participation of international PKOs, where we participate under UN flag or under EU flag, but also, I mean, under the EU flag, we act as part of NATO standards and the programs that have been completed within NATO. So continuation of this NATO cooperation is important for us to develop our own security capacities. NATO's position towards Russia or China. We often receive criticisms when it comes to China and excessive Chinese influence. We must not forget the initiative 16+1, where Serbia is a member, that most members of that initiative who participate with China are actually NATO member countries. And when it comes to this suspicion about Chinese hidden agenda towards the members, towards Europe, actually, one should bear in mind, through joint action with these countries and through joint action with China, we can work on protection of critical infrastructure. That is a full list of things that are very important for Serbia. Once the summit is completed, we'll see the conclusions, and I believe that we have to take into account these conclusions and in future activities and the overall system of national security and policy and economy, we have to take into account what the conclusions are.
Professor Djukanovic, the other speakers have already said many things, but do you have anything to add? Well, I can add a few things. I think what Mr. Dragicic said at a tactical and operational level, but the strategic level will contain the contained in the concluding act of the summit. As regards the Western Balkans, I think this will be concerning the continued Euro-Atlantic integration of Bosnia and Herzegovina. Maybe there will be emphasis on Kosovo. And also, when it comes to Serbia, I expect some kind of continuity of a member that has, on numerous previous declarations, it has been said that Serbia has the option of choosing its own concept, whether it is the existing concept of military neutrality, or to develop it in some way or modify it in some way. So in this way, I expect strategic decisions regarding Western Balkans, and also all the questions that Mr. Dragicic mentioned, but that I think are important. But I think key will be the accession of Bosnia and Herzegovina and later Kosovo. Thank you very much. I think with these expectations, we kind of wrapped up this panel, and we gave some ideas for and topics to think about when we think about the past 15 years or the future of our relations. And I want to thank you, Mr. Šutanovac, and the Council for Strategic Policies that made this conference possible. And I would invite His Excellence Ambassador Petar Dojkov, our host today, the ambassador. Mr. Dojkov, may we hear something from you, finally.
We have just come to the end of our today's event, and to the best of my understanding, that was a very useful and very, very interesting event. Extremely important discussions, exchange of views, and very informative, all of them. We focused on the partnership, the Serbia-NATO partnership, and we took stock of our achievements, and it's a good record, and we mark the 50th anniversary since Serbia joining the Partnership for Peace and the EAPC, the Euro-Atlantic Partnership Council. And we can be proud of our achievements here. And when we speak of the partnership between Serbia and NATO, we have to see that in the regional context. The regional context is very important, and what we have to take into consideration about the region is that when we are in the process of building our European security architecture, we have to be very clear about it. We can't do that without the countries from the Western Balkans and without Serbia in particular. And NATO has a role here, a very important role, because NATO complements our efforts. And again, about the region, to all of us living here, coming from here, it is important to have a peaceful solution to the long-standing conflicts. It is important to continue with the reforms, and it is important to develop and to maintain good neighborly relations. We spoke of the partnership, but we also spoke about the future of this partnership. And it is very encouraging that the partnership has got a future, and many areas of possible cooperation have been identified, and I can only say about I can only mention a few of them, like disaster response and civil protection and science and environment, but also hybrid threats, cyber threats, etc., etc. So there are many areas which could be important for both Serbia and NATO, and we have to take full advantage of that. But it is also important in order to have and to be able to attract greater attention from the part of the audience, of the public. And we have to work more efficiently with media, we have to work more efficiently with young people, with the NGOs, so that what we are doing between Serbia and NATO becomes even more efficient. All we spoke of that. We all respect the sovereign choice of our host country, Serbia, and we all fully respect the military neutrality policy. It is important that all participants have stressed that, and that is how it should continue in the future as well. KFOR, very briefly, also a very prominent place during the discussion. The role of KFOR is very important, and it is for the KFOR to ensure the security and the safety of all citizens. And what is encouraging is that KFOR himself confirmed that KFOR will remain as long as deemed necessary. And before concluding, as a representative of a neighboring country which shares a common vision with Serbia about our common future as members of the European family, I have to say that we shall continue contributing to this process. We are very supportive of the European integration aspirations of this country, and we shall spare no efforts in order to be helpful and useful. At the very end, some of the speakers have already expressed their thanks, but myself, I have to do that as well. The list is very long, but I'll cut it short. The organizers, the panelists, the participants, the media, the NATO international staff, ASG, PDD, then the Foreign Ministry of Serbia, then KFOR headquarters, then we go further, the organizer, CFSP, but also the NATO Military Liaison Office, and of course my colleagues from the Bulgarian Embassy, and also those who came from Sofia to support us, and those all who are able to join us online. I thank as well to all those who followed the event, and I thank you very much to all of you, and also to you, Madam Antonella Richa, because thanks to your professional behavior, we had a very, very successful event. Thank you very much.
And Your Excellency, thank you very much for these closing remarks, for your hospitality here in the Bulgarian embassy, and the support of this conference that I think that it's very interesting for our audience also. Zahvaljujem se svima koji su nas pratili preko YouTube-a i Facebooka. Bila ova konferencija posvećena odnosima i perspektivama Srbije i NATO-a. Hvala vam svima.